Israel is preparing for a possible ground assault against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. At the same time, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel to show solidarity with an anguishing ally, but also to sound out diplomatic possibilities, listening whether or not Israel and the Middle East still have an ear for peace.
From here, I'll go on to Jordan, where I'll meet with His Majesty King Abdullah and with Palestinian Authority President Abbas. And then over the coming days, we'll visit with leaders in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Qatar. Across each of these engagements, we'll continue pressing countries to help prevent the conflict from spreading and to use their leverage with Hamas to immediately and unconditionally release the hostages. We'll also discuss how we can continue to make real our affirmative vision for a region that's more peaceful, more prosperous, more secure, more integrated. And in fact, that is the choice. And the choice in some ways has been made even more stark by the actions of Hamas on Saturday. One path forward is a region that comes together, integrated, normalized relations among its countries, people working in common purpose, to common benefit, more peaceful, more stable. Then there's the path that Hamas has shown in stark, clear light: terror, destruction, nihilism. The choice could not be more clear. We know the choice that we're making, our partners are making. We have work to do to carry it through.
All right, I want to bring in Laura Blumenfeld now. She spent 2 decades as a reporter covering the Middle East for the Washington Post. She also served at the U.S. State Department as a policy advisor for the Middle East peace process. And she is the author of Revenge, A Story of Hope, which she wrote after searching for a Palestinian gunman who shot and wounded her father in Jerusalem. A woman well qualified to talk about what we're talking about tonight. Ms. Blumenfeld, it's good to have you with us. You spent 20 years as a reporter in the Middle East. Where do the events of the past 5 days rank in your experience?
Well, in the words of the Secretary of State, who you were just featuring, it defies comprehension. We thought we'd seen it all. And the 2 words that keep coming back again and again in these broadcasts is unprecedented and barbarism.
If you look at the scale of the Israeli response so far, how do you think the Israeli strategy will evolve?
Well, they've got to present this as a war of necessity. The end game is to erase Hamas, but how do you go about it? It has to be not one of bloodlust, but of basic survival. I think what was so traumatizing for Israelis is that the attack on Saturday not only was an attack on borders, but it was on the imagination. It went to the very heart of what Israel was supposed to be. It went from safe haven to slaughterhouse. And so they need to show strength, because this is all about, in a word, deterrence. But it can't be brute strength. It has to demonstrate sophistication and strategic forethought. I remember speaking 2 years ago, the head of the Mossad, and I asked him about retaliation when I was reporting my book, Revenge. And he said to me, we retaliate. You choose the strategy, you choose the battlefield, and you choose the timing. Now, what's so complicated now is Israel has no choice. It's upon them. They're the masters of the preemptive strike, and they're paying catch up.
And the Palestinians involved here. I mean, we've heard warnings of collective punishment for the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. We've noticed also this week that when Palestinians have been interviewed, it has been difficult even for moderate Palestinians or their leaders to condemn the atrocities carried out by Hamas. Why do you think that is?
When I was negotiating as a State Department senior advisor on Secretary Kerry's Israeli-Palestinian team, we were dealing with concrete issues, tangibles like borders, security, refugee, Jerusalem. But the intangibles were just as challenging, if not more. And what I mean by that is narrative. There's context and history to this conflict. It goes back 100 years or thousands, depending on where you'd like to begin. Yeah. You could take it all the way back to Genesis if you'd like. And sometimes the sides get trapped inside their own narratives, and it eliminates the possibility for empathy, and empathy really is the way forward.
Mm-hmm. We heard a very nuanced message from Antony Blinken today, that support for Israel. At the same time, we recognize that Palestinians have legitimate aspirations not to be ruled by Hamas, and the U.S. will work with those in the region committed to that and to peace. Is that the message that Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to hear?
Well, this was Secretary Blinken's Ich bin Berliner, and I apologize for my pronunciation, moment.
Yeah.
He landed in Israel and he said, I am here as Secretary of State. I'm also here as a Jew. My stepfather was a survivor of Auschwitz. So I think he established his credentials. What he was saying to the Prime Minister is, I am you. You are me. We stand together. And after that, he said, he talked about the atrocities. He talked about Israel's right to defend itself. But he also said how Israel does this matters. We are the same morally, and we expect that of our brother in arms. And so I think that he sort of established the right to demand humanity, and also, yes, sowing the seeds of peace. Look where the Secretary of State's look at his travel itinerary. It's Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and beyond. These are the seeds of peace, because in the crazy upside down world of the Middle East, war often does lead to a greater peace.
Yeah, and perhaps Antony Blinken is the right man at the right time. I mean, the United States, as you know, has been largely absent as a mediator in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for the past, decade and a half. What chance does the Biden administration have to restart those talks?
Well, I think there's great opportunity, and there's also a narrow window, because there are the realities of domestic politics. We're walking into, we're approaching an election season, national elections, presidential race, and nobody wants to run for president with two wars, right? You've got Ukraine, and then there's also the Middle East. Hostages just bring back, the nightmare of Jimmy Carter and an oil crisis back in the 70s. Failed presidential candidates don't, you're not looking for a war or for an oil crisis. All of this threatens that unless there can be a quick resolution.
This week, we've heard numerous times that the path to peace and a two-state solution will be rediscovered in a future minus Hamas and a future minus Netanyahu. Do you agree?
Well, I think that there will be many resignations and political upheaval. Netanyahu's political career started, if you recall, back in the 70s with a hostage crisis, right? Mm-hmm. There was the hijacking of the plane to Entebbe, and his brother was a military hero who was part of that rescue. He died, and Netanyahu's star rose. Unfortunately, I think it wouldn't be, going out on a limb to say that this is the end of his career, ending also with a hostage crisis. They're neat and tragic bookends.
What about the Palestinians? I mean, who is Netanyahu going to call that if he wants to talk with them? I mean, where are the Palestinians who can talk to Israel and have legitimacy among their own people?
Well, the Palestinian Authority, they were the ones who negotiated the Oslo Accords. The first time I was sent to Gaza for the Washington Post was in 1993, where I interviewed Hamas leaders. They were literally sitting in the streets, in the dirt, bemoaning the end of their movement. This was 30 years ago. So I think that because they felt like the Palestinian Authority had seized the imagination of the Palestinian people and represented them. So when there is opportunity, when there is hope, I think that there are plenty of leaders among the Palestinian people who truly represent the desire to live as two people side by side. That was never the case with Hamas. Again, going back all the years that I've been meeting with them, with their leaders, it was always maximalist. It was a religious war to occupy the entire all of Palestine.
I've got about 20 seconds left. Quickly, let me just ask you, talks between Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas and bringing peace, is that possible at all?
Well, I think right now nobody's talking, right? There's going to be fighting, and then the dust settles, and then you figure out where you stand. For the Israelis, they need to really show a show of strength. And if they emerge from this able to sort of reestablish their sheen of deterrence, their swagger, I think they might be willing to take chances for peace. But right now, the Israelis, they're reeling. They're on the ropes. We've seen it before. Yeah. They're on the ropes, just punching. But right now, it's gloves off.
Laura Blumenfeld joining us tonight from New York City. Ms. Blumenfeld, we appreciate you taking the time, and we appreciate you making this talk happen. I know it's been a busy day for you. Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Daniel Kurtzer was ambassador to Egypt under President Bill Clinton. He was U.S. ambassador to Israel from 2001 to 2005. Ambassador, it's good to have you with us this evening. The Biden administration, as you well know, has been critical of the Netanyahu government in the past. The scale of the Hamas atrocities, plus the establishment of this emergency government, do you think all of this will prompt Washington, or is prompting Washington, to give Netanyahu carte blanche to respond to Hamas?
Well, Secretary of State Tony Blinken is landing in Israel probably right about now. And I'm pretty confident that he's carrying two messages. Number one is, please reread what President Biden said, and that the United States stands supporting Israel. We have their back. But I think the private message is you need to moderate the response in a manner that doesn't create its own humanitarian distress and problem. Gaza has been a problem for quite some time. The people are being held hostage by Hamas. Now they have Israeli hostages as well. So Israel will need to take this into account as it searches out the Hamas leadership and tries to decapitate it.
What do you think the role of the United States should be at this critical time? Should it be to offer unconditional support to Israel, or should it be an agent to help break the cycle of violence? I mean, if the United States doesn't do it, then what power will?
Well, I don't like the word cycle of violence. Hamas's actions over the weekend are beyond the pale and represent a horrific escalation of its own. I think the United States, as Israel's closest ally, can provide the kind of sobering advice that I hope Secretary Blinken is bringing. But as you saw, we're also sending 2 aircraft carrier battle groups to the Mediterranean to send a very important message to other players, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran, not to escalate this crisis. So I think we play those 2 different roles. We will work with countries like Egypt and Qatar to see if we can't get some dialogue started to address the issue of the hostages and see how this goes forward. But Israel is intent upon trying to not only diminish, but to destroy Hamas's capabilities of ever doing again the horror of what they committed this weekend.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, he talks about now of reshaping the Middle East. What's your take on that rhetoric? What do you think he means?
Well, frankly, I don't know. I think before Hamas's attack, there was a sense that a Saudi-Israel understanding or normalization agreement would be transformative. And I think that's what the Biden administration was pursuing. In the aftermath of what Hamas has done, however, I think we're going to need a lot of time for things to sort out. And I'm not sure that there's a new Middle East, a comfortable Middle East, that's going to emerge very easily. Israel will be on edge. Hezbollah represents a significant threat, both in the context of what's happening now, but also in the future. Iran's nuclear pretensions represent a significant threat. And so the analysts and policymakers are going to be working overtime to try to figure this out. I think it's premature to make big declarations about what the Middle East will be.
And I'm wondering what this is going to do to the thrust of U.S. foreign policy. The United States has been trying to shift its focus from the Middle East more towards a new security focus being on Asia, of course, a rising China. Does this conflict, does it mean that shifting policy, is that over, or is it going to be suspended?
Well, I think the U.S., as well as others, will have to reassess the bases of its policies and approach in this region. We certainly are not going to change with respect to our support for Israel and its security. We're not going to change with respect to our support for other allies, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. We're not going to change with respect to the importance of the security of oil and gas exports. But how things shape out with respect to non-state actors, I mean, this has been a problem that all of us have been grappling with for a long time, and no one really has a handle on it. With states, you can expect some kind of normal behavior. Sometimes they go to war, sometimes they don't. Non-state actors are not governed by any of these rules. And as we saw this weekend, not only has Hamas broken the rules of international behavior, but has really declined into a bloodthirsty, horrible killing machine, which is hard to grasp.
The level of disinformation on social media, when it pertains to this conflict, I mean, it has reached unprecedented levels. And a common theme that we're seeing is an attempt to create a moral equivalence between Israeli actions and the atrocities committed by Hamas. How do you see this?
Look, it's a particular problem worldwide. I see it on the college campus. I teach at Princeton University, and we want to be sensitive to the feelings of American Jews and Israelis on campus who have been affected emotionally by what happened. But we also need to be sensitive to the fact that we have Palestinian and Arab students who are now watching destruction of homes and killing of people in Gaza. And social media only exacerbates the problem. I think you heard that Israelis have advised parents to keep their children off of social media. They don't want them to see some of the most horrific images that are out there. But you're not going to get a lot of people off of social media, and that means that the chance of disinformation really becomes much greater and only adds to the burden of trying to calm the situation down.
Ambassador Kurtzer, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate your valuable insights tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks.
I just spoke with Shalom Lipner. He is a fellow at the Atlantic Council. He specializes in U.S.-Israeli relations. I asked him how important Antony Blinken's show of support for Israel is right now.
Yeah, it's hugely significant for Israel. I mean, as they're on the verge of what appears to be a larger ground operation, figuring out what the next steps look like. Large piece of that will be sort of the international legitimacy behind that will be the wind in Israel's sails as it, gets that job done. Unprecedented statements of support coming from Secretary Blinken, from President Biden. Secretary of Defense Austin is on his way to Israel as well. We know about the carrier group, the Ford group, the USS Gerald Ford. I think the Eisenhower is on the way to the region as well. I mean, strong show of support from the United States, hugely important for Israel and for the region.
Blinken also today warned any enemies of Israel not to try and take advantage of this crisis. Why do you think he felt that he needed to issue that warning now?
That's right. Again, I mean, he's echoing the sentiments we heard from President Biden as well. When the president talked about the possibility of other people getting into this fray, and he said emphatically, don't. There are real fears that this could expand to other theaters, most particularly the Lebanese border opposite Hezbollah. As we're looking forward to see if this becomes a wider regional conflict or it's something that stays sort of contained geographically to the Gaza area. The statements coming from administration officials, the presence of raw American firepower in the Mediterranean and other parts of the region, sending that message to other people. Israel's going to deal with Hamas. The situation is untenable the way that it is. Let's not make this a larger fight. Not good for anybody here. America's willing to put firepower on the table to make sure that doesn't happen.
Mr. Lipner, you have worked for 7 Israeli prime ministers. Taking your experience here, what influence does the U.S. have on Israel in conflicts such as the one that we're looking at right now?
Well, America's always been, America's always been Israel's backstop in that respect. It's always been there. It's been a real a force of diplomatic support, economic support, military support, even moving forward, when now we're seeing other countries getting involved as well. But when all of a sudden Israel needed reinforcements, now the first country to step up after, being asked was the United States, sending in, reinforcements, shipments arriving. And the fact that the United States will sort of stand guard on the Security Council and other places to say that Israel's performing this task, it has to because the current situation is untenable. That will allow Israel the space to continue that, conceivably, as long as that exists, to be able to get that job done. If that were to dry up, it would, conceivably bring other countries in to start to say, maybe it's time to stop. But as long as America is standing at Israel's side on this, that will have an incredible, the incredible force of keeping Israel moving, towards its target.
Antony Blinken plans to visit Jordan tomorrow. He plans to talk with other key figures in the Middle East. I'm wondering how much influence can the United States have right now in the Middle East, considering that basically for the past 10 years, it's shifted its focus away from that region. I mean, it's been dealing with a rising China in the last year and a half. It's been dealing with Ukraine and Russia. I mean, it's basically been a no-show for a lot of things. How much authority does it have left?
Well, I think this moment, sort of emphasizes the interconnectedness between all these theaters now. I mean, you're right, certainly within the region, you talk to people in the region and you hear repeatedly, concerns that America has sort of picked up and gone elsewhere. But we're seeing new levels of American engagement in the region now as a result of this. There's a lot of writing on the outcome of how this conflict comes out. They've indicated there were disappointment in the Gulf and other places too when U.S. allies found themselves under attack and sort of were wondering why the United States wasn't stepping up. Right now, the White House and other agencies are making it clear that they are here and that they mean business. That will be the message they distribute in other capitals as well, and hoping to be able to sort of reinvigorate that pact between that the U.S. has had with its long-term allies in the Middle East.
Shalom Lipner, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Mr. Lipner, we appreciate your time and your analysis tonight. Thank you.